In Postgres, you can use the limit keyword to limit the number of rows that are returned. For example, let's just start by looking at the customer table. And there's 599 rows in the customer table. If we now introduce the limit keyword, we can limit the number of rows that are returned. So let's introduce it here and run that. And you can see that we now get 5 rows of output. If you recall from the last video, limit is the very last clause that is processed in a select statement, the order being from, where, group by, having, select, order by, and then limit. So after all the rows have been filtered, aggregated, selected, and ordered, then limit is just the final part that acts to cap the maximum number of rows that are returned in your query. I say maximum because if you've got a query that will actually ultimately return less than the limit number of rows, then the limit clause has basically no effect. So if we, for example, select all the customers with the first name of Mary, run that, you can see that there's just one. So if we now introduce the limit clause and we say something like limit 5, it will have no effect. And that's just because limit sets a cap. It's the maximum number of rows to return. If there's less than that, then it has nothing to do. You pretty much always want to have an order by clause in your select statement when you're using limit. And that's because, as we've talked about in a previous video, by default, if you're not using order by, then there's no guaranteed ordering of rows. What limit does is say, give me back the first n rows. So here we're saying, with this current query, give me back the first 5 rows. But if you've got no order by clause, you could get back any rows, because the output is not ordered. So if we were to fix this query up then, let's just get rid of this first name check. It could be that when you run this query yourself, as you're following along, you may find that you get a different list of customers here. And again, that's because we've got no order by clause. It's not well defined when we say limit 5, exactly what 5 customers we're going to get back. So to fix this query, what we'll do is we'll introduce the order by clause and we'll order by first name. And now this is a well-defined query. So just remember, always use order by when you're using limit. You can also add an offset, which can be used to skip a certain number of rows before returning the next n rows. And this can be useful if you're implementing something like paging through results in an application. Let's say you've built a web app, and rather than listing all of the customers in a really big list on the page, you've implemented paging. So only, say, 10 customers will be shown at a time, and there's pages at the bottom, so the user can go next page and they'll see the next 10 customers, they can click next again, see the next 10 customers, and so on. And one way you could implement that would be by using this offset ability. Let me show you how it works. So right now, when we're saying limit 5, there's an implicit offset of 0. So here we're saying skip 0 rows and then return the next 5. Let's change that now. So our offset is 5, and we'll also leave limit to 5. And if we run that, we got a different set of customers. What this is saying is skip the first 5 customers and then return the next 5 after that. And let's do that again. Let's set the offset to 10. Now, if we run that, we'll get a different set of customers again. And what's happening is we're saying skip the first 10 customers and then return the next 5 after that. In general, this approach does have some performance issues, and it's not necessarily the most optimal way to implement paging for very large datasets. But for most practical size datasets, this approach works just fine. The limit and offset clauses are supported by PostgreSQL, MySQL, and SQLite, but it's actually not part of the ANSI standard. The standard way to achieve the same thing is as follows. Offset 10 rows, fetch next 5 rows only. And we can run that, and we see that we get the same result. And in the standard form, you can of course leave off the offset if the offset is 0, and just say fetch next 5 rows only, and that will return the first 5 customers. So that's the ANSI standard way to do the same thing as using limit and offset. I prefer using limit and offset when it's available, just because this ANSI standard way is actually quite verbose. It's very wordy by comparison. Okay, head on over to the exercises.